Now, before we dive into the question, what is the ego? Let's do a little experiment and look at naming and ecology. If we say, what is this leaf? And we draw a leaf there. Well, we have to say that it's part of a branch. And if we say, well, what is this branch? We have to say that it's part of a tree. And what is the tree? We have to say it's part of the ground and part of the sky. We say that, well, what is the ground? We have to say it's part of the planet. What is the planet? It's part of the solar system. What is the solar system? Etc., etc. In other words, we can name something. We can call it a tree, a leaf, a hand, an ego, etc. But ultimately, words are just sounds that are assigned to symbols that help us locate certain patterns. So the ego is one part of reality, and the self is another part of reality, and the ego can break down into subcomponents, subpersonas, just like atoms can break down into subatomic particles. But ultimately, we're talking about fractal representations of patterns at different scale. The atom is a fractal representation of the planet, which is a fractal representation of the solar system, of the galaxy. And the ego is just the level of identity that we know. So having said all that, what is the ego? And to look at that, we have to look at identity. Now, language is often quite helpful. So at the center of identity is I. And we have the sense of a distinct sense of self or identity. It's not always very useful to refer to itself, but we have a sense of this is this particle that's distinct. And identities are composed of a series of patterns. And the first layer is what I think. And what I think is composed of language, meaning one thinks in the corridors of language. And so each word opens up a vista and narrows a vista. If we say the word corridor, we say it's a long, usually somewhat evenly spaced space through which one could often access doors or other things. It's a place, it's a narrow space, a confined place to go through. So it both opens up the vista, but it also closes it down, because the word corridor doesn't reference temperature. It doesn't reference slugs, for example. It's a narrowing process that holds the attention, in this case, focused on shape, and a narrow shape through which human beings can move. And so a word narrows attention and frames attention, referencing a certain pattern of energy. Now, those frames are somewhat arbitrary, meaning I could call something a corridor, which would be a space through which to pass through, but I could also call something, a dira, and a dira could be a frame that leaves a space. Now, a frame that leaves a space is a different way of arriving at a passage through which one could pass through. It's a different sound. Every language has its own sound for the same basic things. But also some languages will approach the focal point, what it's trying to draw your attention to, from a different angle. You can call something space, or you can call something the absence of things, or you can call something the shape around things, and you get a different image. Because if I say that space is the shape around things, or if we reverse it and we pretend that things are the space and space is the thing, and that space is always changing as it interacts with things, if the focus is on the space or the negative rather than on the positive, then you see things differently. So we start the identity with thought. All identity is composed with a pattern of thought. And all patterns of thought link and sync with the language that out of which the thought is derived. So we think in words. And the way that the words are arrived at and the focal point of the words, as we just saw with space and particle, makes a difference in the way that we see things. But that's the first pattern. Now, the second pattern is a pattern of speaking. Now, this can be completely convergent or divergent from the pattern of thought. In traumatic cultures, it is viewed, and in sociopathic cultures, there's value in hiding. Now, in sociopathic cultures, you have the fight, flight, freeze, and please protocols of the reptilian brain. And the reptilian protocol is to run from what is bigger than you, and to bully what is smaller than you, and to freeze or hide when neither of those options are expedient. And so in a sociopathic or reptilian environment, hiding is very important, and thus the invention of lying. Lying is to think one thing and say another thing. So you have a divergence of the pattern. You have a weaker pattern, but you may have stronger survival in a sociopathic environment. Because in a sociopathic environment, if you tell anyone, here's where my money is hidden, here's where I'll be in 2 days with a sack of gold, here's how I can be broken and manipulated, and this is the best way to extract leverage if you want to use fear to manipulate me to do what you want me to do. In a sociopathic cult, the sociopaths around will take careful note. Here's how to hit him. There's how to do this. There's how to do this. And they will use that information to cause the most possible harm to their victim. And so the invention of lying is a response to sociopathic environments. So the more people lie, the more people hide. In one form, lying is just a form of hiding. I could pretend I'm going that way and then secretly go this way. I could say that I'll be there next Tuesday and instead go there on Wednesday. But we're talking about a divergence between the symbol and the underlying behavior. But in healthy and empathic cultures, you actually want to tell the person exactly where you'll be, because in healthy empathic cultures, truthful information is used to help the other person. So you say, my finger is hurt right there, and the doctor goes right there and puts on some antibacterial cream and a Band-Aid. Versus you tell your sparring companion or your enemy that you're hurt right there, and they will attempt to hit you and twist to cause more pain with less effort. And so the second layer is words. thinking is a pattern of identity. Speaking is a pattern of identity. Then you have action, and action has its own pattern. But again, in healthy and more sane environments, because what insanity is just an incoherent correlation of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being with the underlying environment. And so the more integrity, the more integration you have between thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, the more sanity you have. And what you're also doing is you're making it easier for someone to connect with you. If you say, I will be here, and think you will be there, and then show up there, and then feel pleased when somebody meets you there, and you've got a nice integrated package, you've got integrity. It's very, very easy for someone to relate to another person who has very high degree integrity. However, if you think you want this, but you say you want that, and you feel bad when somebody tries to connect with you where you actually are, and then you lie about it, it's very difficult to connect when people talk about being unlovable or lovable in a technical sense. You're talking about the coherence of the pattern. If you say you want this and somebody giving it to you beautifully makes you unhappy, you are unlovable. Not because there's anything fundamentally wrong with your being. It's just you've got the road signs set up so that it says turn left when you want them to turn right. And so you're unlovable because most people are not psychic, and so they're going to turn left if they're empathic. Now, if they're sociopathic, you're also unlovable, meaning because sociopaths can't love. But sometimes you can trick a sociopath. If a sociopath is trying to do the most damage and you want them to actually turn right, then you might tell a sociopath, turn left. That'll hurt me if you turn left. And then the sociopath will turn left. But if you actually wanted them to turn left for a certain reason, well, then you've got then the misdirection can actually be, in a sense, more self-loving. But in general, it's not that the sociopath is actually capable of love. You're just capable of manipulating a sociopath into being less damaging. But to actually be loved starts with someone caring about you and wanting to do the thing that will bring about your well-being. If people want to do the thing that will bring about your suffering and think that that's love, they are misinformed. But in an insane and relatively sociopathic culture, love is correlated with all kinds of abuse. For your own good is a great example, and Alice Miller, in the book of the same title, For Your Own Good, goes into that in good detail. But to be lovable, you need someone who wants to facilitate your sustainable well-being, and you have to want to facilitate your own sustainable well-being. And then you need to communicate what that is in a language that the other person can understand it, and is capable of responding. I mean, you may need, for example, a warm hug, but if you're talking to a quadriplegic who cannot hug, then you're not actually, speaking a useful language in the situation. So you want to line up your words with something that can be done, with somebody that wants to do it. when you want to experience well-being. And then if you integrate your words, your thoughts, your feelings, and your behavior, you have the capacity of being loved. You are lovable. So we have your thoughts, your words, what you speak out loud. Then you have your feelings, and your feelings often correlate to your thoughts, your words, and the environment, which includes other people's thoughts and words. Feelings are very much like colors. And if you look at your television, they have usually 3 or 4 primary colors, and all the other colors, all the other states of visual perception are rendered with different combinations and intensities of those 3 or 4 primary colors. And in the same way, there are primary feelings. And out of those primary feelings, all kinds of human states. You can create 256 million colors and a computer chip can digitally note the various distinctions. You can have 256 million shades of gray. You can have 256 million colors. It's just limited by the capacity for a computer chip to break it into bits. The human eye cannot usually distinguish colors that fine, just 256 million and 1, 256 million and 2. It's just a very, very small difference in those core colors, and so the eye often doesn't take note of it because it's not relevant to our existence. But the last level is being. You have thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing. This is your identity, and this is your habit. Now, being is referring to the body, for example. You have a breath pattern, because each of these are patterns. That's what makes it an identity. You have a pattern of breathing. You have a pattern of vocal tone. So it's not just the habit of saying similar things repeatedly. You think of a name as an identity. What's your name? My name is Dane. Now, if every time somebody asked me that question, I said it was Dane, then I said it was Jill, then I said it was Flibly, then I said it was Guga, and you would say that's an incoherent. Coherence refers to repetition. To cohere is to find a pattern and stick to it. Glue adheres. You find an object and stick to it. You have cohere. You find something and you stick to it. So that is my name. Dane, 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 Dane. You have a coherent pattern. So for someone to have a cohesive, a coherent identity, there has to be a certain pattern that the observer can see. Now, if the observer cannot see the pattern, you don't have an identity. Meaning, if you look at yourself and you say, I have no idea what's going on in there. I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm thinking. I don't know why I'm thinking it. Don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. I don't know what I did yesterday. I'm incoherent. It's called losing yourself. I've lost coherence of the pattern. Now, similarly, if someone looks at you and says, you said you liked this, now you say you like the opposite. You were voted for this person, now you're voting for that person. You say you're a Christian, but you just drove by those homeless people. You're insane. Meaning you've lost coherence. You don't have a coherent identity, and so you've lost yourself. And others have lost you as well. I don't follow is often the word, meaning I can't see where that pattern leads to that pattern. I don't see the connection. I cannot follow you into the chaos that your identity has descended or ascended into. I don't follow. And so for you to have an identity to somebody else, they have to be able to say, that's that guy with a pale face and shorter hair and a cap and a green, what is this, a fleece thing, then the turtleneck. These are patterns. Now, they're useful patterns because they're coherent, meaning they could make clothes that change around constantly, and then it wouldn't be a useful pattern. It wouldn't be an identifier because you couldn't identify it. If you said you're a number and the number is constantly changing, it's kind of useless. So what we look for are stable parts of the identity to reference, to say is where's the continuity? That's what you do to try and find yourself and know who you are. And that's what other people do to try and say, that's that guy, he's tall, he's this, he's that, he has a nasally voice, or this, or that, and they pick things that are unlikely to change from day to day. And then that's that's the part of your being. Your being is, your way of being in this body is part of your identity. Most bodies don't change that much. Though, of course, if you, and to recognize is just to reassemble the pattern in your awareness. I recognize you. How did you recognize me? Well, it's the nose. That's the way. Or you always talk like this. You walk like this. But I've got a burned face. I had third degree burns. I no longer. Yes, I know, but I recognize the voice, right? So you have different patterns, and that's your identity. Now, when you've lost identity is when you cannot find yourself, meaning you can't see anything coherent going on in there, and nobody else can either. You look different, you sound different. Maybe you're, got a tracheotomy, you had third-degree burns, you've amputated, and now you're thinking completely different. So nobody can recognize you. They can't reassemble the pattern they know. Because to know something is to remember, member again. So there's a going back to objects and patterns of energy and then reassembling it. Remember. I remember you, your coherent pattern. I have a memory of your pattern. And then I have a reaction to it. I don't like that bit of it. I like that. I do this. I see that you have a pattern. And I have remembered it. And you can remember a pattern in many, many different ways because the conscious mind observes less than 50% of what the senses perceive. So, your brain hears 100% of the sounds that come into the ears, but your consciousness only registers, meaning notes down, less than 50% of that. So, I could be focusing on your thoughts. I know that thought. You're the one who thinks this. My focus could be on thinking more than being, or I could focus on noses. That's where my attention goes. And so I remember someone and re-identify them through their nose pattern. Dogs find people based on their scent. And so you show up in a different outfit and a wig and a this and that, and people may not remember you. They don't put you together again because the cues they're using, hair color, jacket style, accent, are all different. So they've lost the scent through their eyes. But the dog isn't looking at you through their eyes. They're looking at you through their nose, and so the pattern stays the same. So the dog can remember you more reliably in that case than a human. So you're looking at locating the identity. So you have a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And there's one more part of sanity. We all have a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. We have a pattern. And every pattern is intelligent in a certain environment, and is absurd, destructive, insane, not intelligent in another environment. So, let's say that this is the identity of a fireman in a fire. So that's what this is. So is everyone okay? Are there any children in the house? Wearing a protective fire gear, wearing a heat shield, breathing oxygen. In a fire, these are intelligent things to do. So my identity, my pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being is crystallized, is focused around saving life in a fire, a house burning down, that kind of thing. So I'm hydrated, I'm wearing the right clothes, I've got the fire truck nearby, I've got the walkie-talkie, I'm gathering data, I'm going and rescuing children. I'm in an identity that relates to a fire. Okay, so there's a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that makes sense in a fire with the goal of saving life. Now, what happens with PTSD and other mental and emotional disorders, or really identity disorders, is that one can get into a loop for a variety of reasons. One can get sometimes shock. Now, let's take a moment to look at shock. So shock is the experience of the identity shattering. So how does an identity shatter? Well, if you're a tree, you've got the identity of leaves and all this. So let's look at what it takes. So most trees, or at least half of the trees out there, are going to live and keep their identity as a tree. But as with any identity, if there is a force equal or greater, an energy pattern equal or greater to the identity that is encountering the tree, you can think of it as the pinball and the bowling ball scenario. So the law of mass dictates that when a pinball collides with a bowling ball, the bowling ball's rolling towards the pinball at 20 miles an hour, and the pinball is rolling towards the bowling ball at 20 miles an hour, and they meet at 40 miles an hour. What happens? Well, it's obvious. The bowling ball is heavier and bigger. That's called mass. Its energy is denser and bigger. And the pinball is lighter and smaller. So the energy absorption sends the pinball flying, and the bowling ball continues maybe at 19 miles per hour rather than the 20, because it absorbs the energy. There's some friction in knocking the pinball out of the way, but it basically continues. So identities are patterns of energy. And when an identity collides with a pattern of energy that is greater or the same size as it is, it will shatter, rupture, alter, shock, traumatize the identity, in terms of the human psyche at least. Trees may not be traumatized, but it's the same basic function. If a bulldozer runs into this tree, that's the blade of the bulldozer. If the bulldozer, a Cat D9, is able to push trees over maybe 2 or 3 feet in diameter, you're just plowing. So if a bulldozer collides with this tree, the identity of a vertical patterned organism that's taking carbon dioxide out of the air and producing oxygen and absorbing water and creating cloud cover and various things, regulating temperature, that whole pattern of existence, that identity is shattered. It's now a fallen log that's decomposing, right? The identity is breaking down. So life is a series of complex relationships between identity. The tree is changing the soil is changing the tree. You have identities in a relay of energy, in a relationship. So if the bulldozer collides with the tree, you have a shattered identity. Now, if fire collides with the tree, you have a flame rushing through the forest and 40-mile-an-hour wind, you again have a shattering of identity. Now, depending on the nature of the fire, it could just be a singe and the tree regrows. Or it could shatter the whole cambium, it could burn the cambium off, etc., and then there's no more identity. There's still bits of it, or maybe it consumes the whole tree, right? So fire is another thing that can shatter the identity. A big flood of water, 3 million gallons of water rushing by the roots of the tree and eroding all around it and knocking it over. So there's a certain amount of air. Air at 300 miles per hour can shatter the identity of the tree, knocking it over. And so basically almost any pattern of energy. In my landscape design work, I recently designed a steel gate. And it's stunning to think that the intricate patterns of the design were cut with a water jet. A water jet is cutting steel. Why? Because the pounds per square inch, the PSI, the intensity, and the little particles and things, water can cut steel if it's strong enough, or steel can cut and divert water. So almost any pattern of energy, if it's big enough and intense enough, can override a status quo. And when that happens, the tree is no more. If you have 30 million gallons rush over a tree along with thousands of other trees, and they all grind up into dust, basically, and break up, once that water subsides, you cannot reassemble that tree. You can't find the branches. You cannot put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And so identities are fragile. Why? There's always something bigger. There's always something more intense. There's always something bigger. There's always something more intense than any identity. Now, our theory of the universe, for example, is the biggest theory we have. But if we know anything about fractal echoes of, infinite scales, there's a multiverse that's bigger than the universe. And there's a multiverse. We've never been able to find the smallest particle. And we can't even begin to fully conceptualize the universe, let alone go to what might be bigger or on the other side of the universe. So there's always something bigger. And for a human being, 99% of all that is bigger than a human being. There's 10 trillion stars bigger than human beings. Endless amounts of earth are bigger, all the trees are bigger. So a tree can destroy a human identity. When the tree collapses on top of the human body, the human identity is shattered. And that's called trauma. That's called often PTSD. So when there's a strong, catastrophic, irreversible rupture of the pattern of the identity, then you have trauma that often crystallizes into PTSD. And what's happening is the ego is the one that identifies with the pattern. So there is a consciousness inside this pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, and it's called I. And it is the one that looks at the larger self, because all things are connected. You know, a leaf can take you all the way back to the Big Bang. I mean, let's get real. You know, in our current mythology of everything originating out of a single point less than the size of a pea, what that means is that we all have common ancestry. It means this finger and your finger, this computer screen and that computer screen, your worst enemy, your best friend, your greatest dream, your greatest fear, it all came out of that little energy the size of a pea. So what's happened as the pea, you know, got to be a bigger pea and a bigger pea and a bigger pea, and then as bits of the pea went through a series of bifurcations. Now, at each of the bifurcations, there's 2 ways or more to go. And every single thing that has taken a path on that bifurcation journey. So some things at this juncture turned left, other things turned right. Some things got denser, other things got lighter. Some things got closer, some things got further away. Some things got hotter, some things got colder. Some things grew 1 inch, some things grew 2 inches. Some things rapidly deteriorated and turned into something else. Some other things held their shape. At every single point in the possibility field, we have a bifurcation into infinite possibility, of which we know of the bits of possibility that we know of. And out of that crystallizes certain things that are more probable, and out of that, certain things that are actual at this time, and out of, you know, and then certain other things that were actual in the past or in the future. But what this means is that any single thought, idea, feeling, belief, dogma, religious, deity, demon, poem, word, anything at all that ever has been, is, or will be, can follow its thread back to the original seed, which in our story is a Big Bang, which in our current emphasis on material to the extent of other things, happened for no particular reason, and consciousness is just one of these weird things. But if you look closely at the psychology, of people that are rationalist, reductionalist, atheist, materialistic, you will generally find some anger, some boycott, some hostility, some rebellion at what was perceived to be, the parent, the God, the teacher, the universal beneficial force, whatever that was, did them wrong. And so they're having no part of it, right? And so, it's, you won't get, but, it takes a lot of theory, and it takes a lot of incongruity for a materialistic atheist to say everything that you and I think means nothing. Existence does not mean anything. It has no purpose. Nothing I say matters. It's just a random fluke of stuff. But it's really important to me to convince you to buy my book saying that nothing that I say matters. So why should we buy your book? Well, because it matters to me that you get that you don't matter and that God doesn't matter. That matters to me. So consciousness does matter. Otherwise, why should we read any book? Why should we go to education? Why do So you have a tremendous flaw, just as were asked to believe on faith that the entirety of all that is emerged from something less than the size of a pea. What's the flaw? Well, you have to take it on faith. They can't reproduce it in a test tube. You know, you say, I think I heard a vision of my dead aunt. She said to, I have the family blessing, and because I heard her and I believed that, I went on and did this and whatever. And I knew the moment my father died. Well, that's you can't reproduce that in a test tube, so that doesn't exist. But the Big Bang exists because we can't produce that in a test tube either. And we can't prove that this, rabid materialists are devoted to proving that they are right when their own theory says that their consciousness is a random anomaly. So what does it matter whether they're right or wrong? You see, so it breaks down. Or, you tell a materialist, okay, my whole hand was once the size of a pea. So take my hand and produce something the size of a pea. Get it back that size. Can you do it, right? Take just one of the many planets and get that into the size of a pea. You said you said the planet came out of a pea. Why don't you put it back into a pea? Oh, we can't do it. But you scoff at everyone else who can't produce what it is that they think, right? Even while pretending that what you think doesn't matter, because in radical materialism, consciousness is a bizarre, meaningless anomaly that has no purpose, just like the universe has absolutely no purpose. And so why are they going around trying to teach that? Why are they upset that nobody's listening to them when what they say has no purpose and means absolutely nothing, right? So you realize that there's a lack of integrity in so many of these things. And yet the scientific reality would suggest, to the degree that you believe everything emerged out of a little thing, is that every single thing that is in existence has a common ancestor, and it's called the pea, because you can trace it all the way back, however many billions of years, all the way back to that moment where it was all bed. They were all in the same bed. You want to get into somebody's pants and have sex with them. Billions upon billions of years ago, you were right in there with them, right? There was no space between you. It was endless density and all that stuff. So you all come from the same fabric, says the scientist. And so what's the identity? The identity is the pattern of deleting 99.9% of the possibility field to be in one specific pattern, which is largely just deleting everything else. If I'm not of this and I'm not of that, and it's not Sunday and it's not Monday and it's not this, it must be this time at this place, what remains? So a lot of what identity is, the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, is not thinking 99% of the things that I could be thinking, and not feeling 99% of the things I could be feeling, and not doing 99% of the things I could be doing, and not being in 99% of the bodies I could be in, and not being in the location of 99% of the locations I could be in. And that makes me distinct by a process of deletion. I'm not doing these things so I have a coherent identity of repeating a very, very small part of the possibility field. And this ties in with evolution, because what life does as a way of going from almost nothing into something very big is at each of these bifurcation points, there's an experiment. And the experiment is which one is more successful in this given environment. And the things that are most successful continue, and the things that are not successful die off. But nature and life wins regardless, because life is in the one that dies off and life is in the one that continues, meaning life cannot lose. It's always winning. One planet out of a billion life-affirming planet goes up in nuclear smoke, and life learns. Oh, people whose brains develop faster than their hearts, radical scientists who lack empathy, are not a very good viable solution for life. So on these other billion planets capable of creating life in the next trillion years, we won't create more of those radical materialist scientists that don't produce much empathy. We just won't produce more of those because they kill themselves off. That equation cancels itself out. So we'll do more empathy and then develop brains. And we'll put more focus on transcendence and meaning because that works better, right? Life is creating a trillion experiments out there. And life has an endless amount of time. Life has trillions upon trillions of years. And look what it's done in just the past 20 billion years. Look at all the stuff that life has done, including you and me. So life's got it made. Life's a winner. Life has many experiments, and the experiments are all identities. They're patterns. This pattern of energy relating to this pattern of energy equals what? This pattern of energy relating to this pattern of energy equals what? Well, going back to trauma and PTSD, the way human patterns, if you create a lightning bolt of energy, and we'll just imagine this is incredibly intense, if you create a lightning bolt of energy and crash it into a human's thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. So what could this be? Being hit by a train, that takes care of most of your body, being lied to and betrayed and sexually molested by your priest, that takes care of a lot of people's faith when they learn how actively, for example, some of the major priests and churches have covered up pedophilic behavior and actually, moved pedophiles from place to place in God's name. That puts a little bit of a dent in the idea that you should give your money and time to these fellows, who would never get married and have sex with another adult, but would, of course, happily molest a large number of children, and then cover it up and blame the child, right? So, just look at mea culpa maxima, the impact of, deaf boys in boarding school being further traumatized by their priest and all that. So, that should shatter a little bit of their religious faith, and then, corruption in government should take care of, by the time you're 40 or 50, should take care of most of your sense of patriotism, and then, by the time you've voted for 5 or 10 politicians, and they've all lied to you in one form or another, and then by the time you've sought true love with the shining prince or the damsel in distress, only to discover more misery rather than happily living ever after, well, that kind of shatters that myth. And what's left? I mean, if you've gone through all that, so I can't take anymore. Now, who's the one saying I can't take anymore? It's the eye, it's the lens that looks out through the identity. Now, that lens doesn't exist. The ego dies with the shattering of identity. The sense of the partitioned, isolated self looking out through the pattern of the identity dies. When you get hit by a train, when your beliefs get broken, when your heart gets broken, when your bank account is robbed by the latest hacker scam, and it turns out, that it's not what you thought it was. When the pain reaches a certain point, there's just like a checkout, right? But the ego longs to live. It longs to survive. And so one of the things the ego does in these highly shattering traumatic events is it finds a very strong pattern it can hang on to and survive in. And often what that is the traumatic event itself. So someone with PTSD, a Vietnam vet who was told by their government to drop napalm on women and children, and who saw the faces and who was troubled. Surely this is not defending American values. Life, liberty, in God we trust. Is it napalm or God? I'm getting confused here. I thought God said to turn the other cheek and do this, but napalm says burn women and children alive because some country halfway across the world didn't agree with the dictatorial edicts of some guy who wants to be elected for proving that they're frightening, for proving that they're tough. There's trauma, and it's painful. You look at the eyes of those children, and you say, I want nothing to do with that. But that's who I am. I don't like who I am, but who else am I? Right? And if that is too shocking and too severe, the identity goes into a loop, and it's often the worst memory, because that's often the memory that sends you into a loop. It dissociates you. So you go into a loop. Who am I? I am the one that does this. Who am I? I'm the one that does this. Who am I? I'm the one who was hit by a train. Who am I? I'm the one who was hit. I was the one who's hit. I'm the one who's hit. So when the identity begins to shatter and evaporate, one of two things happens. In healthy and transcendent and spiritual cultures, it's called transcendence. The delusion of partition dissolves. And you start to see, I'm not just this stuff here. I'm part of something bigger. I'm connected to all things. I'm alive, and life is alive in me. This tree is a part of me. Some of the poetry, some of the stories of the Native Americans. How can you buy and sell your mother? How can you own the water that flows freely? How can you mindlessly slaughter your brother, your ancestors, out of which you emerged? They took a different fork in the road, all starting at the core, at the center of time, at the center, at the beginning. They didn't stand up. They didn't get out of the water. But we all have the same ancestry. All human beings have the same genetic heritage. In many cases, we can be traced back to the African plains, to maybe 20 or 30 original ancestors genetically. So why are you my enemy? You took this road and I took this road. They took this road, we took this road. But we're all part of life. And there's an awakening, an enlightenment. What is enlightenment? It means your pattern, the light's trying to get in, and the pattern softens, it loses enough coherence, and the light can flow right through rather than bouncing off. And so enlightenment is the transcendent dissolving of the pattern to reconnect with the one, with the whole. Whereas trauma is, and so that's one vector to go to in certain things. For example, people in near-death experiences. There's nothing more shattering to one's pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being than to have one's brain starved of oxygen, than to be hit by a car, but then rushed around in new environments and new clothes. You're thinking different thoughts, you're having different feelings, your whole identity shifts, and then you see the light. You feel this great sense of peace and interconnectivity. So that's one way that it can go. And you feel a little safer, a little more, less worried about things, that all things have a purpose and no energy is created and destroyed. It just changes from one shape to another. And of course, every identity is a shape. The energy in that identity will not be lost. It will just change. And life will continue her beautiful journey of creating a trillion scientific experiments every moment and seeing which ones grow and where do they go, right? Because one thing we can be sure of is life is getting bigger, life is getting more complex, and life is a winner because life bets on all hands. If you want to be an absolute winner, just put $1 on every single bet that has ever been, will ever be, and is. And you're bound to win. Life is betting on life. And life isn't picky, If you end up being life's winning jockey, you get to go on and procreate and create more life. And life will cheer you along. And if you're one of the ways that life learns, this is not a good way to do things because you lived a miserable life, getting worse and worse, and then died without creating any offspring or any patterns that can outlive you that are useful in any way, life takes note. I see. This one, that doesn't seem to be a very good recipe. But never fear. As your identity dissolves back into life, life will repurpose all of that energy, and it'll funnel towards the winning hand, the one that works, right? Life is a winner. Anything that can go from the size of a pea to a universe so big that parts of the original size of the pea can't even fathom it, in only 24 billion years, with another trillion to go, is a winner. That's life. Life is getting bigger, smarter, faster, more complex. And life's going to win regardless of what you and I have to say about it. We can nuke this planet 10 million times, but we already know there's 1 billion life-affirming planets that we know of. 1 billion. And life's just getting started. So we can be the experiment life uses to say, oh, not that way. We'll do the other 99 billions this way and this way, right? And we'll find one that works, and then that one can become interplanetary and sow seeds of life because it works. Hooray. Or we can be the one, right? We have this wonderful identity, this wonderful opportunity to practice and see what works. We can practice and see what works, practice and see what works, and see what happens, and do this, and do this, and do this, and this, and this, and then we can be the one that wins more than anything else, right? We have that possibility. Life's a pretty fair player. You all started with the size of the pea. Let's see who makes the right choices and gets to be the one that has the more influence than the other. That's going to be a more collaborative. It's more efficient to collaborate. It's more efficient to synergize than it is to do battle. You think of a tug of war, 50 people, and they spend an hour trying to pull each other a few inches on a rope. What an idiot, right? What stupidity. You take those same 100 people and have them plant 1,000 trees in an hour. 10 trees each, an hour, 1,000 trees are planted. Those are smarter people. Life benefits from smarter people. Rather than sitting around trying to pull each other in a tug of war, go out and plant 1,000 trees and regulate your temperature and improve your oxygen for your next generations and all of that. That's obviously very intelligent. So PTSD is kind of the other direction when there isn't enlightenment, when there isn't awakening from the pattern to realize that we're not just the I that identifies with the pattern. We're also the witness, the one that witnesses the I identifying the pattern. And we're part of our ecology because, going back to the question of insanity and sanity and the firefighter, etc. Well, if you're in a huge, 2-inch thick insulated jacket, breathing oxygen, shouting fire, who needs to be rescued, you're a hero. And you're saving lives. But you take that same person and they're at home and there is no fire. And they're massed up and rushing out shouting fire. And people say, oh, they've lost it. What have they lost? They've lost the correlation between the identity and the environment. So every identity, that's the last piece of identity, is the ecology out of which the identity emerges, meaning sane, healthy identities respond to the environment. Kids don't just learn English randomly. They learn English in an English-speaking environment, which is a response to the fact that it is efficient. I mean, the kids could learn Japanese, and they would if they were born in Japan, and it would be efficient to learn Japanese, and they do in Japan. But identity that correlates tightly with environment is one of the key aspects of sanity and success. Wearing a red, 2-inch insulated fire jacket in a burning building, you've got good, tight correlation with the environment. It's called appropriate. And the jacket is a winner. Being at the beach, no fire in sight, dressed up as a fireman, that's called weird. That's called not getting it, right? And so identity, one of the biggest reasons that so many people, so many egos, fight change in environment is they're actually protecting themselves. The ego says, I don't know who I would be. I don't know how to talk with Muslims or I live in a socialist country. I don't. Bingo is the new Lord. I don't know. I don't know how to relate to that. Meaning, my pattern, my established pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, was formed when I was a child. And when I was a child, we did things like this, and this was okay, and this was considered funny, and this was considered delightful, and that was considered a good sport. And all those were good. And that's me. I'm the one who thinks this, feels this, says this, and does this, and bees like this. That's me. I am that pattern, says the ego. But the environment has changed. Now that's sexist, that's racist, that's this, that's bad, that deserves to be punished. We won't have that around here. That's over the top, that's old-fashioned. Wait a minute, all the things that I am is bad now? Me? My pattern is bad? You don't want me? Because the ego doesn't know anything else. This is me. The ego has no ability to transcend identity. That's me you're talking about there. I'm not bad. When I was a boy, when I was a girl, whatever, this is the way it was. That was appropriate. You know, the fireman who's retired, who doesn't know the new identity. It's like, I was the one who went to rescued all those kids. Yes, but you're retired now. Well, they can watch movies of firefighting and this, and they can drink and, you know, put on the firefighting gear, but now you're getting a little crazy. Why? Because the identity, the ego is always afraid of what? Losing identity. I won't know who I am. I don't know who I am. I have no value. You know, when I was a boy, we did this and this and this and this, and I was the strongest. Yeah, but that's meaningless. Now we're using apps for that. But I don't have an identity using apps. And I'm no longer good at, I'm now klutz. So my identity has gone from hero to klutz. Not because I've changed. I've still got it. But it is no longer a fit. I have this shape, but this is now the new environment. And I'm a thorn in its side, meaning I'm not correlating with these old shapes. I'm poking at them, and they're pushing at me, and they don't want me. They don't want me. They don't want my pattern. They don't value my pattern. This is a crisis of identity. What can the ego do when I am this pattern, and this pattern is no longer valued? There was a day when being white meant I was superior. Now I'm the bad guy for being racist. I don't like it. You know, I don't know how to change and still hold on to me, because that's me. I am this pattern. Now, in the more kind of severe traumatic thing, you have a narrowing. There's somewhat shock and disorientation. There's so many waves that the consciousness gets narrower and narrower and narrower. And the focus is on a loop of the most traumatic events. And you get lost in that pattern as a way of the ego holding on to itself. As the ego saying, I'm not going to lose, I'm not going to disappear. I'm not going to lose myself. Where can I find that's solid? And often the most solid thing that an ego can find is its most intense, painful memories. The memory of being hit by a train, and then hit by a train, and then hit by a train, and hit by it's the last bit of coherence I have. What happened after that? The change is too big. I can't make the connection. I can't move into the new identity. I don't want to move into the new identity. I don't like it any there. I was playing with my dolls, and this and that happened. And then Daddy put this big thing in me. It doesn't fit in the identity. I don't want to think of it. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to be a bad girl. I don't want my dad to be a criminal. And so narrowing, the ego stops maturing, stops growing up. I'm 4 years old. I'm still playing with my dolls before this happened. No, I'm 4 years old. For the rest of my life, I'll hold on to that identity. And don't bring me out of my loop, or I will not know who I am. And in a sociopathic environment, that's an environment where highly traumatized people are misunderstood, humiliated, attacked, exploited by sociopaths. That's what a sociopathic environment is. I don't trust this cult to make the transition from a broken car that I still feel familiar, familiar, safe. It's a pattern that I know. I will not go through the unknown in a sociopathic environment. In other words, when you're surrounded by sociopaths, and you've seen all this evidence of sociopathic behavior. You look at school and you see who's the one that gets hurt the most? The one who's in the most pain. That's sad, isn't it? Who gets hurt the most in school? The one who's in the most pain. Now, we could hurt the richest person, the most popular person, the most handsome and beautiful person, the smartest person. We could pick on them and level the playing field. But nah, let's not do that. Let's take the person who's poorest, who's got the worst social skills, who's the most vulnerable, who's the most disabled, who is terrified of loneliness. And let's pick on them. This is the crisis of stupidity, because we traumatize people constantly, and they cling to their identities for one reason. They're in their worst memories with PTSD. They're in there. They're going round and round and round and round. And they can't get out because they're afraid of you and of me. They're afraid of not knowing who they are, of losing their identity and making the sketchy journey, the unpredictable heroic journey, through the unknown to find a new identity, a new pattern of thinking and feeling and speaking and doing and being. That would be good for the culture, that would be good for themselves, that would set them free of the prison of the old horrific memories. But they don't trust you and I, because you and I were in that playground and we didn't say a word. Because mom and dad sent them to school knowing they would be abused, rather than protecting them. Because mom and dad shamed them for coming back traumatized. They said, you stick up for yourself and do this. And once they finally found an identity, some identity, however stupid, however limited, however clone-like, cult-like, they survived in that identity. That was their pattern. And then all this stuff happened, and it got ripped away from them. And they do not want to go through the unknown in a sociopathic cult, so they cling. Empathic cults are defined by the more someone is in pain, the more attention, the more support they get. The reptilian brain is, who can we win? That's the weakest, most vulnerable person. The empathic brain is, who's in the most pain? How can we as a group own it and help? Now, in an empathic culture, first of all, you study trauma because it's the worst human experience. Losing identity and being confronted with death and the unknown is the most terrifying experience a human can have. And adding the fear that everyone will exploit that weakness and use and abuse them during the vulnerable shift of not knowing who one is to finding some new identity is horrific. It's the most lonely human state you can create. And we create it all the time as a cult. That is traumatically, psychologically illiterate. Create it all the time. And the question is, what do we do to help this trapped person trapped in their worst memories and nightmares to go into this beautiful new shape? That once their ego knows it, once it's familiar, once it feels like family, they can breathe into this new identity. They can find themselves in a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, and become magnificently contributive to evolution, to life's journey, to the cult, to the culture, to themselves. That's why we need to become psychologically literate. The ego is the one inside the pattern looking out who believes they are the pattern and who is shattered as the pattern shatters and who is desperate to survive above all else, who's afraid of death because death will shatter the pattern. Death will not end life, meaning no energy is created or destroyed, and we are part of a much larger equation out of which we emerge and to which we will all return. But it will shatter the ego. The ego is the one that looks out from within the pattern. That's the ego. And thank you for joining me in this exploration. Hi, I'm Dane Rose. All knowledge begins with a paradigm, and out of that paradigm comes an idea, an awareness that we adopt, reject, or synthesize into something better. It doesn't become wisdom, it doesn't become useful until we take action, until we integrate it into not only our thoughts, but our feelings, our body, our words, and our way of being. For that to occur, we have to move from the passive media paradigm into more active engagement. In the link below, in the More Information section, is an invitation to join a very small, deliberately filtered, high-quality discussion with a group of people who share a common language and want to work with these ideas, with me and with one another, with the sole goal of creating 10 times more sustainable well-being for ourselves and those around us per unit of energy invested. Thank you for watching.